It was a cold morning in downtown Chicago, the kind of morning where breath turned to mist, and everyone moved faster just to stay warm. Elliot Graves had just stepped out of the Tech Global Summit, his custom wool coat barely touched by the wind, thanks to the swarm of assistants and security around him. Reporters had shouted questions earlier, something about AI regulation and ethics, but he hadn't really heard them. He'd given the keynote speech, shaken the right hands, and was now gliding through the sidewalk crowds like a man made of certainty. Until he wasn't. A small figure broke through the blur of tailored suits and expensive shoes. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old, bundled in an oversized jacket with a missing zipper, her hair pulled back with a rubber band that had seen better days. She held out a crumpled piece of paper with two hands' eyes fixed on his face like she already knew who he was. Please, marry my mom. Elliot stopped walking. The papers in his hand fluttered to the pavement. His assistant said something, maybe sir, but it was just noise now. He stared at the girl, at her trembling fingers, clutching the paper, at the fierce clarity in her voice. She wasn't joking. She wasn't lost. She was here with purpose. I'm sorry, what did you just say? He asked, blinking, as if trying to reset his own mind. Please marry my mom, she repeated. She's tired and you're in her yearbook. I think you should help her. Elliot's chest tightened. Yearbook. What yearbook? My name's Naomi, the girl said, unfolding the note with a practiced kind of reverence. My mom's name is Celeste Monroe. I found your photo in her old book. She never talks about you, but I know she used to know you. Celeste Monroe. It was like someone had hit him in the stomach. That name hadn't passed his lips in nearly 15 years. And yet here it was spoken by a girl with the same eyes, dark, intense, intelligent, standing in the middle of the city like a ghost from a life he'd buried. We were in school together, Naomi added. MIT. That's what the yearbook says. Elliot couldn't answer. Couldn't move. Celeste Monroe had been the most brilliant mind in his graduate cohort. They'd stayed up for nights working through data models, talking about the future of ethical AI, sketching dreams on whiteboards and napkins. And then one morning, only one name had been on the project proposal to Gravitech's first investor. His. He'd told himself for years that it was business, that she would bounce back, that people like Celeste, so smart, so driven, always found their way eventually. Naomi's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. She works really hard. During the day, she delivers groceries. At night, she cleans offices. She's tired all the time, and she still studies after I fall asleep. She's trying to be a lawyer, I think. His breath caught. She doesn't know I'm here, Naomi said quickly, almost like a confession. She'd never ask for help. She says some people are rich in money, and some are rich in soul, and that's enough. But it's not enough. She's sick, I think. She doesn't say it, but sometimes she can't stand up straight. Elliot looked down at the crumpled paper in her hands. It was a list. Jobs, hours, medications, bills. At the bottom, Mom doesn't know I'm writing this. Please help her if you can. Naomi, she's never told me what happened between you, the girl continued, but when she sees your picture, sometimes she looks sad and turns the page. A gust of wind whipped through the street. Somewhere behind them, traffic blared and executives barked into Bluetooth headsets. But Elliot didn't hear any of it. How did you find me? He asked, his voice quieter than he expected. The library, Naomi said simply. I used the computer there. There are articles about you. A lot of them. You're really rich. He almost laughed at the absurdity. A little girl barely old enough to ride the bus alone had just hacked into the deepest part of his past using nothing but a yearbook and a public library terminal. Why me, he asked. Why do you think I should help? Naomi looked up at him, her expression so calm it unnerved him. Because you knew her. Because she helped you once, I think. And because I don't think she's ever really stopped believing in you. And just like that, Elliot Graves, billionaire, innovator, titan of industry, felt his entire foundation crack beneath him. He'd spent years refining code crafting algorithms to predict human behavior. But no machine he'd ever built could have anticipated this, a 9-year-old, with nothing but hope, faith, and a battered piece of truth in her hands. And without knowing it, she had just set the game in motion. Elliot stood frozen long after Naomi disappeared into the crowd, her small frame swallowed up by the swirl of pinstripes and patent leather. The paper she'd handed him trembled in his hand as if it held a pulse of its own. He didn't remember walking back to the car. He didn't remember the ride to his penthouse. What he remembered, what replayed again and again, was the sound of her voice when she said her mother still believed in him. That night, Elliot sat in the glow of his office, 27 floors above the city, staring out at the glass and steel jungle he'd conquered. Gravitech, the empire he built from an algorithm, from an idea. But not his idea, not really. The truth had always lived somewhere, just under the surface, tucked away behind accolades and acquisition deals. Now, for the first time, it clawed its way out. He opened his laptop and typed a name he hadn't searched in over a decade: Celeste Monroe. A few hits came up: old academic citations, a photo from an undergrad science fair, but nothing recent. Not until he pulled up the company's internal access log and scanned the janitorial contractor list. There it was. Monroe C., hired through a temp agency. Assigned to Gravitech Tower, late night shifts. Floors 61 through 66. His office was on 63. She had been walking these halls while he closed million-dollar contracts, while he gave TED Talks on transparency and technology. She had probably wiped the fingerprints off the glass doors of the conference room where he'd pitched to world leaders. The realization made his stomach churn. He clicked into her personnel record. $13.25 an hour. No benefits. No sick days. No warning to his world that she had ever been there. He leaned back, eyes shut, flooded by images. He thought he'd buried Celeste's voice, laughing beside him in the data lab, the way she lit up when they argued about neural networks, the trust in her eyes when she showed him her model, her notes, her equations. The night he copied her files felt distant and close all at once. At the time, he told himself he was desperate, that the opportunity wouldn't come again, that he would make it up to her somehow. He never did. She had vanished from MIT within weeks. Rumors of academic dishonesty, but nothing ever public. No lawsuit, no articles, just silence. Until now. Elliot ran a hand down his face. Naomi had cracked something in him. Not just guilt, he could live with guilt, but the terrifying idea that everything he had built might have been a lie. What if Celeste had proof? What if she still had the original documents? What if she had been watching him all this time, gathering receipts from beneath his feet? He picked up the phone. Miguel, he said to his assistant, I need everything you can find on a woman named Celeste Monroe. Employment records, academic history, legal filings, everything. And discreetly. No internal emails, no trace. Yes, sir, Miguel said, though Elliot could hear the question buried in his tone. After he hung up, Elliot stayed seated, staring at the employee list on his screen. Monroe C. It sat there in black and white, as if daring him to acknowledge what he'd done. He should have felt in control, he always did. But this didn't feel like a problem to solve. It felt like a trap that had been set 15 years ago and was only now beginning to snap shut. Because if Naomi had found him, maybe she wasn't the only one watching. And somewhere, maybe only a few floors below, Celeste Monroe was waiting quietly, patiently, just like she had in that data lab all those years ago. Only this time she wasn't building a future for both of them. She was building a reckoning. The next morning, in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on Chicago's South Side, Celeste Monroe stared at the ceiling long after the sun had risen. She hadn't slept. Not really. Sleep required peace, and peace wasn't something she'd known in a long time. Naomi's backpack was already by the door, her coat draped over the chair, her breakfast barely touched. Celeste had noticed her daughter was quieter than usual last night, nervous in the way kids get when they have done something bold, but don't know if it was brave or stupid. Celeste hadn't pushed. Naomi would talk when she was ready, but deep down Celeste already knew. Something had changed. When Naomi finally spoke, it was over a lukewarm spoonful of oatmeal. I saw him, she said. The man in the yearbook. Celeste nearly dropped her mug. He was leaving a big building downtown. I gave him the note. Told him your name. Her heart stopped, then kicked back up like a drum. Naomi, why would you do that? Naomi didn't look up. Because I thought maybe he could help you. And because you look sad whenever you see his picture, like part of you is still waiting for something. Celeste closed her eyes. The naivety of a child and the terrifying accuracy of it. I told you never to go into the city alone, she said, her voice trembling more from fear than anger. I didn't go alone. I took the bus. I had a plan. Naomi replied matter of fact, like she was defending a science fair project. Celeste didn't speak. What could she say? The man her daughter had just walked up to, the man who stole her work, her future. Her dignity was now aware that she still existed, that she hadn't disappeared like he probably hoped, and that terrified her. But beneath the panic was something else, something harder, colder, a current of control. Because if Elliot Graves was rattled, it meant the clock had started ticking on a plan she had been shaping quietly for years. She tucked Naomi's hair behind her ear and kissed the top of her head. "Promise me you won't do anything like that again." Naomi hesitated. "Okay," she whispered, but Celeste knew the girl was lying. She'd inherited her mother's resolve, and perhaps her recklessness too. As soon as Naomi left for school, Celeste locked the door, closed the blinds, and pulled out a worn black binder from beneath the floorboards. Inside were record statements, copies of early drafts, old code printouts with time-stamped headers. She had spent years gathering them, working in the shadows, cleaning offices by night and connecting the dots by day. She took out her prepaid phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in months. "Marcus," she said when the voice picked up. "We need to move up the timeline." There was silence on the other end, then a slow exhale. "He knows worse. Naomi found him first." A pause. "That's unexpected." She handed him everything without realizing what she was doing. Marcus cursed softly. "You still want to go through with it?" "I've waited 15 years, she said. "This just means I don't have to wait 15 more." The rest of the day, Celeste moved differently. She wasn't just a woman going to her night job anymore. She was a chess player who realized her opponent had just been forced to see the board. By midnight, she was pushing a mop across the marble floor of Gravitech Tower, the same tower Elliot had built on the bones of her algorithm. She didn't need to guess which floor he worked on, she had known for years. And now, thanks to Naomi, he knew she knew too. She glanced at the security camera in the corner of the hallway and gave it a tired, neutral look. She had learned long ago not to show her thoughts, not here. But inside, something was shifting. Not fear, not even anger. Readiness. Because Naomi had opened a door, and Celeste intended to walk through it. 3 nights later, Elliot was still staring at the same line of code on his screen, but his mind was nowhere near the server. Since Naomi's approach and Miguel's quiet confirmation that C. Monroe had in fact been cleaning the very floors he walked on, his thoughts had been spiraling in tight, anxious circles. The office felt different now. It wasn't just space, it was suddenly history. The air carried a weight he'd never noticed. Every hallway, every surface might have been touched by the same woman he once betrayed. How many times had she been just steps away without him knowing? The thought made his skin crawl, not out of fear, but out of the unbearable clarity of guilt. The silence of his private office was broken by a knock. Miguel entered, carefully closing the door behind him. "I found more." Elliot gestured for him to speak. "She's not just a cleaner, sir. Celeste Monroe's been living under the radar for years. But 3 years ago, something shifted. She enrolled in an online law program, night classes. Graduated with distinction last spring." Elliot blinked. "Law? She became a lawyer?" Miguel nodded. "And she didn't stop there. She's connected to a handful of whistleblower networks, privacy forums. She's been quietly feeding information to journalists. Names, documents, contracts. And there's one more thing." He placed a folder on the desk. Elliot opened it. Inside was a series of annotated screenshots, contracts he'd signed, memos he didn't remember, environmental approvals he'd thought long buried. Each one was marked with a small yellow highlight and a precise timestamp. She's been collecting evidence. For years. From inside this building. It felt like the floor beneath Elliot gave way. How she's been photographing everything, leaving no digital trail. Just analog. Old school. Elliot set the folder down and stood walking slowly to the window. Below him, the city pulsed, neon signs, brake lights, lives moving forward. But for him, time seemed to stall. He realized with grim certainty that this wasn't just about one stolen project anymore. Celeste had built a case, a damning, careful, bulletproof case, and Naomi had only accelerated the timeline. "She's forcing my hand," Elliot muttered. "No," Miguel said, hesitant but firm. "She gave you a chance. That little girl didn't come here with lawyers. She came with a note." That hit deeper than Elliot expected. He turned from the window. "We need to know everything. Who she's working with, what she's leaked, what she's holding back." I've already traced some of it, Miguel said. There's a journalist, Marcus Langston, writes for the Independent Ledger. He's been in contact with Celeste for at least 2 years, and she's not alone. There are others' names from your past, people you've had conflict with. The implication hung in the air. How bad is it? Miguel hesitated. If she goes public with what she has, Gravitex stock will crater. The SEC will open an investigation, possibly DOJ. This could go federal. Elliot sat down heavily. The game had changed. The board had flipped. Celeste wasn't just back. She was winning. He reached for his phone and dialed her number from the employment file, one he had never thought he'd need. Straight to voicemail. No surprise. But she didn't need to pick up. She already knew he'd be calling. That night, Elliot stood in the same marble hallway she'd walked for years. It was past midnight, and the building was nearly silent. He imagined her moving through it, unnoticed, invisible, collecting the pieces of a story no one had wanted to hear. Now the world would have no choice, and Elliot Graves, for the first time in his career, was no longer in control of the narrative. 2 days later, at precisely 8:17 a.m., Elliot Graves stood in the center of Gravitex's soaring marble lobby suit, pressed tie, perfect heart pounding. He'd cleared his morning schedule, canceled press interviews, and pushed an investor call that would have made headlines because this meeting he knew could destroy everything faster than a market crash. The elevator dinged, and there she was. Celeste Monroe stepped out like she belonged there. No cleaning uniform, no badge, just a sharp navy suit, low heels, and a calmness that came from knowing the ground beneath her feet had once been taken, and that now she stood on her own terms. Beside her, Naomi held a leather briefcase too large for her small frame, but she clutched it with both hands like it carried something sacred. Elliot, Celeste, said, her voice even. Not warm, not cold. Measured like someone who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. He swallowed. Celeste. There was a long pause. You invited me here, she reminded him. So I assume this isn't about rehashing the past. Or pretending we were ever friends. He nodded, gesturing toward a small glass meeting room just off the lobby. Privacy. I don't need privacy, she said. But I'll give you the dignity of silence for what comes next. They sat. Naomi placed the briefcase on the table, clicked it open, and quietly slid out a stack of documents thick enough to topple a lesser man. Elliot didn't touch them. Celeste leaned forward. I'm filing suit, full claim to the algorithm, restitution for all profits derived from my intellectual property, 15 years of damages including interest and punitive claims. You'll find the valuation inside. He didn't look. He didn't need to. The number had haunted him since Miguel ran the preliminary projections. $2.8 billion. That's the current value of your empire, she said flatly. Seems poetic. I built that company, Elliot said the words out before he could stop them. They sounded thin. Desperate. You built it on my back, she replied. On code you didn't understand, a concept you didn't believe in until investors threw you a check. You didn't build it, Elliot. You branded it. He tried to shift the tone. Look, I'm willing to settle. Quietly. We don't need to ruin each other. Celeste gave a short, bitter laugh. You think I came here to ruin you, Elliot? I came here to end a lie. You're not the victim in this story. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing to say. Naomi was watching him, her eyes unblinking. You still could do something good, she said quietly. You could tell the truth, before someone else does. Elliot felt the pressure rising in his chest. Reporters were already sniffing. The whispers had begun. The timing of her suit was no accident. She'd known exactly when to strike. Just like in grad school, strategic, meticulous, 10 steps ahead. But she hadn't come here to gloat. That's what unsettled him most. She hadn't even come angry. She had come ready. Outside the glass walls, the lobby buzzed with activity executives walking past security guards pretending not to notice someone filming on their phone just out of frame. Elliot stared at the documents, knowing that signing them wouldn't just cost him money, it would erase the mythology he'd spent his life constructing. The genius, the visionary, the self-made man. Celeste stood. I don't need your signature today, she said, but I will get it. Naomi reached out and took her mother's hand as they turned to leave. But just before stepping through the glass door, Celeste paused. You taught me something, Elliot, she said without looking back. In this world, people like me have to be 10 times smarter to get half the credit. So I made sure I was 100 times smarter. And with that, they were gone, leaving him in silence, surrounded by glass and gold, holding nothing. By the time Elliot reached his office, the lobby encounter already felt like a dream. Sharp, surreal, too precise to be real. But the stack of legal documents Naomi had left behind wasn't a dream. Neither were the headlines waiting on his tablet. Whistleblower claims Gravitech algorithm was stolen, suit demands $2.8 billion in damages. The woman behind the code, Celeste Monroe, steps out of the shadows. Empire built on a lie. He barely made it to his chair before the phone started ringing. Legal, PR, board members, investors, the SEC. He didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he watched the news feed loop silently on the wall monitor. There she was, Celeste, outside the courthouse, flanked by her legal team, and a small crowd of reporters. Calm, professional, impossibly composed. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was an unraveling. And she had pulled the first thread. A knock came sharp and fast. Miguel entered, eyes wide. "Sir, we have a problem. FBI agents are downstairs. They've got a warrant." Elliot stood up so fast the chair tipped behind him. What for what? Wire fraud? Misrepresentation of intellectual property? Possible investor deception. They're interviewing your department heads now. Elliot stared at him, unable to speak. Outside, the Windows Press vans were already pulling up. A reporter was setting up a camera on the curb. "How did they move this fast?" he whispered. Miguel didn't answer. He didn't have to. Celeste had been preparing for this for years. Naomi's note may have accelerated the storm, but the hurricane had already been building quietly just below the radar. And now it was here. As federal agents entered Gravitech headquarters, Elliot knew the image of control was gone. The narrative had shifted. He wasn't the innovator anymore. He was the thief, the fraud, the man who built a kingdom on borrowed brilliance and then tried to forget who he borrowed it from. A private message pinged his phone anonymous number. "Mr. Graves, I believe it's time to tell the truth." "See," he dropped the phone. Downstairs, agents were boxing up files. Upstairs, employees stared into their screens, refreshing news feeds, wondering if their stock options were worth anything anymore. At that moment, Gravitech wasn't a company. It was a sinking ship, and Celeste had struck the hull below the waterline. Elliot moved to the window. Chicago shimmered under a pale morning haze. He used to look out and feel invincible. Today, he felt something far more unfamiliar. Small. He thought of Celeste working quietly in the shadows, mapping every corner of the company he thought he owned, watching his rise, not with envy, but with strategy. And then Naomi, brave, precocious, wide-eyed, holding a note like it was a torch. He hadn't just stolen code. He'd stolen time. 15 years of it. Years she could have spent building her own empire, shaping her own legacy, walking into rooms where her name was already known, not forgotten. And yet, even now, she hadn't destroyed him with anger. She'd used the truth. There was still a knock at the back of his mind, something Naomi had said that wouldn't stop echoing. You still could do something good. He didn't know if that was true anymore. He wasn't sure redemption existed when the rot went that deep. But he knew this, the woman who had once trusted him and the little girl who had handed him a second chance with both hands had changed the course of everything. Now the world was watching, and the next move was his. 6 months later, the name Elliot Graves no longer appeared on the front page of Wired or Forbes. It was whispered in conference rooms as a cautionary tale, a footnote in tech history. The man who once claimed to shape the future of artificial intelligence now lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment above a bike repair shop in Evanston, selling suburban homes to first-time buyers. No reporters chased him now. No cameras followed his footsteps. The silence was humiliating in a way that headlines never were. But on the other side of the city, something entirely different was unfolding. Inside a packed auditorium at MIT, a woman in a gray silk blouse and black slacks adjusted the mic clip to her collar. Her posture was effortless, her voice calm and firm. The screen behind her displayed a single line in bold white letters. Justice is not revenge, it's repair. Celeste Monroe was back not as a student, not as a guest, but as the keynote speaker for the Institute's Ethics in Emerging Technology series. The same halls that once turned their backs on her now stood to welcome her. Professors leaned forward, students scribbled notes. Some simply stared awed by her presence and poise. And in the front row, Naomi sat with her legs crossed, at the ankle wearing her new school uniform, a dark blazer with the Foster Foundation pin at the collar. She smiled not like a child proud of her mother, but like someone who knew exactly what it had taken to get here. Celeste told her story without venom. No dramatics, just facts: what was stolen, how she'd rebuilt in silence, how knowledge when paired with purpose could become a weapon more powerful than any headline. Revenge was never the goal, she said, looking out over the crowd. The goal was to make sure no one else had to fight the same invisible battles I did. That's why I created the Foster Foundation for every brilliant mind that was told they didn't belong in the room. The screen shifted to a photo rows of young faces, students of color, immigrants, working-class scholars, all recipients of the Foundation's new scholarship program. In just 6 months, over 300 had already been placed in internships, coding fellowships, and legal mentorships. In a quiet corner of the room, a young black student hesitantly raised his hand. "I have this idea," he said, voice shaking. "It's a tool that tracks digital gentrification in low-income areas, but I don't think anyone will take me seriously." Celeste tilted her head, a gentle smile forming. "Tell me about it," she said, "and this time we'll make sure no one steals your dream." Naomi watched the moment and leaned back in her seat. She didn't need the applause. She didn't even need the world to understand what her mother had done. She knew. That afternoon, as they walked back through the courtyard past students buzzing with ideas and ambition, Naomi tugged on Celeste's hand. "I used to wish you'd married him," she said quietly. "Back when I thought that was the only way life could be better." Celeste paused. Naomi looked up. "But now I get it. We didn't need him. We just needed to finish the story ourselves." Celeste smiled, her eyes damp with pride. "You finished it too, baby. You started it." In the distance, a spring breeze lifted the edge of a banner fluttering above the auditorium doors. Celeste Monroe, reclaiming what was lost, reimagining what comes next. And as they walked into the light, hand in hand, there was no bitterness left to carry. Only clarity. Some victories aren't loud. Some don't come with applause or settlements or headlines. Some come in the quiet certainty that you've turned pain into purpose and that no one will ever silence you again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that truth has power and that silence isn't always defeat, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts in the comments, because somewhere out there, someone is still fighting to be heard. And maybe your voice is the one that helps them rise. Thank you for watching.